Art doesn't just reflect the future, it builds from lived experience, resistance, and imagination. What happens when those visions come from voices long pushed to the outside of gallery walls? Listen to my next episode with Leo, otherwise known as Soldier, as we discuss his latest curation and first with myma in a digital presentation called The Future Tense.
Hi, my name is Leo, also known as Soldier. I am a painter, sculptor. I run a design studio in London, and this is my fifth time in New York, fifth time in America.
Wow.
Yeah.
Leo, otherwise known as Soldier,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. Really looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah.
So I'd love to jump right in and talk a little bit about the exhibition that you've curated with myma called Future Tense, which is a digital exhibition on view for the next couple of months. Features incredible artists from different parts of the world, lots of emerging artists, some established. Can you talk a little bit about the ideas around the title Future Tense? And then we can dig a little bit more into the works.
I think the title came from an idea that I was exploring way back in 2024. Most of my paintings or most of my work is based on, using references and like life experiences. I did a lot of paintings from the past and the present, but then I thought to myself, it would be exciting to do works that were based in the future. And so I did this bodies of work called Title Black Star, and was kind of set way into the future. It was kind of like a speculative idea of how would it look to document the Black body, the Black figure in the future, and was the implications of it. And so obviously meeting myma, we were kind of like riffing ideas and thinking, okay, cool, what would we make this show about? And I was like, we could pick up this idea because it'll be very interesting to see how people go about the future. It was so funny. I came across, there's this like modern philosopher, his name is Mark Fisher. And he mentioned that we've reached a point where just because how bad things are, and obviously this is like a rough quote, no one's really looking ahead into the future. Everyone's kind of recycling the past. So you see how there's like the Y2K coming out, the 90s is coming, the 80s, the 70s, people are dressing like quite old, but no one is really looking ahead like the way they used to way back. So for me, I wanted to like try that theory and make artists around me think about the future and interact with the future the way they used to do in the past when they made like Star Wars and doing, and not too set in futurism, but set in what is your speculative thought of what the future is.
Yeah, I love that. It pulls on so many different ideas. I want to come back a little bit to myma and ask a bit about, one, had you been familiar with them before? And two, I'm really curious around the selection of artists and some of the selection process, maybe some of the conversations that you were having, whether it was with the team at myma or with your friends or with the artist. Could you share a little bit about that?
With myma, it was like, again, time ago. And I think at the time I'm very insular. So I spend most of my time in the studio. I try to cut off as much noise as I can. Sometimes I'll peek my head open and see what's happening in the art world. And I feel like it caught my attention through a friend of mine, and she made the connection. And obviously we had a conversation, and it was really exciting what they do on the platform. So it was really exciting to work with such a forward-thinking like organization in terms of the arts, like breaking down the walls of what an exhibition is, how the artist could be involved that isn't like a white gallery space.
Absolutely.
Secondly, I think thinking about the artist in relation to the work, for me, again, I just tried to make sure I picked people, or I was very intrigued in artists who could come with like a first take or like a personal take of what the future is. And I think all the artists we picked, they had such interesting takes on that. It was really exciting to share what the future is with several people and see how they portrayed it.
Are there some works in the show, specifically Future Tense, that stand out to you? Things that are just, for any particular reason, works that you're either drawn to, maybe aesthetically or for the context, or maybe for the artist specifically?
There's one particular one, and this is of a friend of mine who is also from Nigeria. Her name is Moya Briggs, or I just know her as Moya. And I know she plays a lot with like self-identity, just like myself, but like a lot playing around with photography and different photo editing. And I've seen her process since when I was really young, and I'm talking about like 2016, 2017. And then I saw her apply for it, and it was very interesting to see her take, because she put herself forward as a side of what the future kind of looked like, which is really interesting. And I think the art world is quite like male dominated. So it's quite refreshing to see like a female, they'll obviously bring something forward. And also a friend of mine as well. There was a lot of amazing picks, but I think that is like what comes to mind. Like her work was quite like, okay, that's very interesting to see you participate in this.
And I love you mentioning women in the arts
Yeah.
because that's really important to me
Yeah.
as well. And to so many. You mentioned a little bit about the selection process. Was that collaborative with the MIMA team?
Yeah.
And so how were the artists already on the table? Was there a bunch of names that were in a hat and you got to select? Or how did that work?
When I first got the project, I think the first thing I did was I told all my friends, because I'm like in a pool of like good artist friends in London. I told some of my friends, oh, I'm going to do this. If you guys want to be involved, obviously it will be great to see your works. But then the whole process of like picking the artists, I think MIMA, they have such a good system already. They have a big community, like honestly, a huge community actually, and very impressive because it's a combination of up and coming artists and also seasoned artists. And it was very easy because all we did was just compile the filler and so many people responded to it naturally. And obviously with their help, we're able to filter through 1,000 applications. I pick not the best ones, but the ones that kind of fit, because there's nothing like good or bad. It's just fits.
I want to move a little bit now and talk a bit more about you specifically, your practice, how you developed over time as an artist. Let me have some notes. You work across painting, performance, design, and sculpture. What draws you to really work across multiple mediums and to think about telling the story that you want to tell in many different ways?
I started by pinpointing how I felt, what was personal, and the things that I had or didn't have. So kind of the first kind of bodies of work stemmed from my growing up experience in Africa and Nigeria. Tiny things I noticed or I was trying to realize when I was making work. Like, for example, the camouflage paintings was my run-in with the military back home and how prevalent war and the idea of war is in different nations and how that's like an anchor point. And so by painting the camouflage, I realized I'm an artist of symbols. Like for me, it's not one thing, it's the symbol of what I pick, the object or the subject, and I let the symbol speak for itself and let you put your meaning or your layers into the symbol. And it could be family, it could be friends, it could be found imagery, it could be object, but as long as I find a symbol that kind of like it talks about my experience growing up or I talk about a human condition or like a place, I think then it does the work. So I see myself as a historian of some sort. Like I put things together, both like personal, both like factual, and then I create like a symbol, be it like a portrait of a friend or my sister or a series of my passport, which I just scanned and then screen printed onto a canvas. And I just let you understand how like different things give a different reaction and kind of hold a different weight throughout history, especially through my vision.
Love that. I think what I'm curious about in your response is hearing you reflect on growing up and being born and raised in Nigeria and starting a collective with your friends, skating, getting into skate culture. I think skate culture is such an incredible gateway to so many things. And it has, I think, influenced so many people across the world. I remember traveling with skaters and there are just so many memories, incredible memories that I have about that period of my life. But there was something that you could feel, you couldn't always describe what it was, that people thought differently. They felt differently. They were somewhat rebellious. They were going against the grain. And you're always, even just the idea of skating, you're trying something. You're not landing that trick.
You're not for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. You keep trying to land that trick. You're not landing that trick, but you keep going. And I think that consistent attempt to do a thing and to do it and fail over and over, it builds a certain kind of resilience. But I also think it helps you see the world in a very
different light,
in a completely different way. And I would just love to hear you riff on that, because I think my assumption is that had you not had some of those early experiences, would you be here? Would you be doing what you're doing? Who knows?
I have a funny thing with the way time works. You know, when people ask me, if you weren't doing this, would you be here? I have no idea because it didn't happen. But the one thing I would say, skateboarding or the culture around it, counterculture, I feel was a catalyst of my way of thinking. So I feel like when you see an artist, you're not necessarily looking at someone who's a craftsman. You're looking at someone who has a way of thinking and a way of applying that knowledge through artifacts. And I think my first interaction with a system of thinking was through skate companies and skate videos and the way, for example, a company like Supreme will get like a work from Damien Hirst or Rita Ackerman and put down a skateboard. And then there's layers to what the skateboard holds, because the skateboard is almost like a canvas holding someone else's way of thinking. Or like this skate video is filmed in a particular way, holding the filmer's way of thinking. Or this person is doing this set of tricks that shows their way of thinking. And it's so counterculture, because I feel like even the arts in itself could be quite disruptive. Like you see an artist and what they're trying to do is show you a way of thinking that's only kind of unique to them. And sometimes it could be decorative, but sometimes it could be conceptually disruptive. So I feel like my upbringing was very strict and I didn't really have space and time to think. And then by finding skateboarding, it ripped me away from that strict upbringing and just let me start thinking for myself. And at first it was obviously trying to find myself. And it was like, oh, I wanted to skate in Nigeria and there was no skate scene. And I was surrounded by friends who were really interested in different types of music. And we're like sharing all these like things that in Nigeria wasn't the thing. It wasn't the cool thing. But we started doing it. We started making videos of it. It started becoming quite cool. And then looking, this is fun. I found something quite unique. But then from there, I started interacting with different subcultures and realizing, oh, so this person that made this song is actually like a genius. And they like this painter and this painter is making this. And everything was just all connected. And then it finally led me to my practice as an artist. And that's why most of my work, it feels disruptive. But at the same time, it's just like a way or a system of thinking and how to turn that into, I would say, a career and also creating artifacts from it, just like skateboards.
Yeah, I love that. I'd like to go to your exhibition at Now House, which I saw in Lagos last year during Art Act, and talk a little bit. So the title of the show, Nourishment, I remember seeing a lot of the imagery. I remember seeing things that were easily familiar to me because they're food items,
Of course.
thinking about consumerism, but also just thinking about how we see and experience the world around us. And I love the scale, the color, the brightness, but it also at the same time felt like what you were really talking about, like what the context of the work was quite serious.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that there's something, I'm always attracted to work that allows you to get in this place of color and composition. I can talk a little bit about that show and kind of some of the ideas behind it.
I think, again, it stemmed from my idea that I think artists in some ways are historians. And I feel like history is always happening around us. Like we're looking at things. And for example, you see the current system of government, that in itself, like when it keeps going forward, when you look back, it becomes history.
Right.
Or you're living in it and you're experiencing it. And most times it's very not great. And there's a lot of dissatisfaction in the system. And all of this kind of happens through several things, the economy, war, business, like all of these kind of play a role into forming like the human narrative. Now, I'm not really interested in the Western human narrative because I feel like you can get that from anywhere. But what I am interested in is the African, the Nigerian narrative, especially because right now, Nigeria is becoming such a reckoning force in the global scale. But then I think just the same way I grew up and I knew certain artists, like I grew up knowing Elvis Presley and understanding deep Western history for some unknown reason to me, obviously through Hollywood films and through the internet. I feel like I need to do the same for my history. I need to put at the forefront. You could stumble across it and also understand certain things, and it could be as accessible as like certain Western tropes. So I wanted to tackle an issue, and the issue was showing people what Nigeria felt like in the, let's say, well, not the early 2000s, but in the past to how I grew up and how Nigeria shaped my view. And I wanted to do that through food, and not necessarily food, but the packaging of food, because I found things, the things around me to paint a picture to lead you in. And so you can do your own research. I was thinking, isn't it a bit crazy that we had all these foods that could possibly cause cancer or could possibly have very deep, terrible chemicals in it? And it was like a staple for eating and nutrition in a country like Nigeria. And I started looking at why. And then you realize, oh, there was the war. And you realize that kind of gave an open space for companies to come in from like Indonesia to give us certain food, because obviously they're trying to make a profit. And then you see the packaging of that food through graphic design and through the arts is enticing, and it calls kids and people eat it. And then there's a whole thing of malnutrition, and many Nigerians, we don't even get anything from that. But that was the entry point. And then once I found out the logos and I picked out the foods I grew up like ingesting, I just made collages and I turned the collages into the painting. So it was like a process going from like the concepts, then finding the things I want to explore, then ripping it to pieces and like assembling it together and then making this new version of it. And so that was the idea behind it. And I think that's what I wanted to capture. I wanted to capture a feeling and a fact. And I wanted to do that through food and through the perspective of a Nigerian person.
You said so many things in that response that I want to pull back on. But the idea that one, history is being created as we're living. And so we look back on last year and that's history. We look back on yesterday
and that's history.
So it's continuously unfolding. And yet at the same time, you spoke about having consumed Western history for most of your life. It's, but not having consumed your own history and recognizing that the history of Nigeria, of Africa, and of the different regions of the continent is not as widely known. And so you feel a responsibility to tell that story and to rewrite that history. I want to speak about something there's an interview that you have in ID, and this is a loose quote, but you mentioned that you mentioned being more conscious of what you think and the fact that thoughts have power. And that's making me think a lot about, and very much a part of the Yoruba faith.
Of course.
And so I think you mentioned something about the idea that there are some things in Western culture that are just widely known. Like people know Elvis Presley. They know the dance moves. They know the songs. Even if you maybe have never even heard any, totally. But the idea that you could make sense of African philosophy or African different kinds of proverbs and different kinds of ideas, that feels like it's in line with everything you just said.
What I want to do essentially is I want to be able, and this is how I felt growing up. I think I've always dipped my fingers into certain things. Like I've always felt like growing up, I was a bit westernized because I was very interested. I was like watching Disney, High School Musical. Like that was like my go-to cartoons. But then at the same time, I'll go to school and I have someone like fully speaking Yoruba to me and like really asking me to do certain traditional things. So I've always felt like a mix of these two things. And I feel like I want to represent that feeling because I know so many people have that same feeling and want to be able to embrace both tradition and also the West and like marry it. But at the same time, I'm also trying to put African tradition or like certain things that have happened in history on the pedestal to make it almost as, I won't use the word cool, but almost as digestible and acceptable as the way I saw Marilyn Monroe and I was like, oh, that's fire. I want people to look at Mercy Jackson and be like, oh, she's fire. That's an actress. That's a Nigerian actress.
How has art given you a sense of belonging?
I mean, I think the idea of being an artist and again, delving into other people's like frameworks and thoughts of thinking or like finding a community of friends who do the same thing and going to exhibitions and going into shows and interacting with works and writing theses on works, delving into it. It's just amazing because then you feel like you belong somewhere. You feel like you're coming from a long line of people who decided to come out of the system to do this thing of art making, mark making, print making, poetry, writing. Like you're just part of these, and I'll use this word very like lightly, romantic group of people who put emotions and thought process at the front, and they do it in a way that I think art is very risky. When you think of the idea of getting a pencil and a paper and turning that into a career, just like showing people your framework and then people judge you or interact with you just based on your ideas and your mind, I think it's very bold. And it's amazing just coming from a lineage of people who think or who know that they can do these things and get away with it. So it feels like I'm with a group of people who are able to do the same thing that I do. And it's refreshing. It's cool.
That's awesome. And final question before we wrap. If there could be any collaboration that you would do next, what collaboration would you like to do? Whether that might be realizing a big project or working with a particular brand or any kind of.
I think I've been really into the ideas of, I was walking past like the Hudson River today and I saw this playground covered in ice and it was like really cool and wooden. I thought it would be really cool to make a playground, like to design like a playground made out of sculptures, like a sculpture park or something that people could go in and experience, but not just seeing it, but like they could climb in it, jump in it, sit, read on it. And that's fun.
I love that.
And that will be covered in ice. Yeah.
This was a great episode.
Thanks so much.
That was my episode with Leo, aka Soldier. If you enjoyed this episode, consider supporting our work by becoming a subscriber. When you subscribe to Lightwork, you support the work of contemporary artists and the insightful and impactful conversations that I have with them as we investigate art, culture, and society. You support a female founder and a Black entrepreneurship at a time when our government and private corporations continue to eradicate DEI efforts. Subscribe to our Substack and you'll receive exclusive information and resources about each episode, behind the scenes content, and more. And remember, follow Lightwork across social platforms for more insights into the inner world of contemporary artists and thought leaders shaping culture.